Hello there. Welcome, everybody. Today I'm joined by Meredith Angwin. I met Meredith Angwin in the United States. She is a wonderful lady who writes a lot about electricity, about energy, and nuclear in particular. And we share a lot of views on energy. And I really think that it is high time that she got a spot on, on my show to get to tell you what she thinks about what is going on in the world of energy. So Meredith, I'm very pleased that you're here today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be invited.
Yeah, and I've been reading your Substack, though not as religiously as I should, and I know that you're very. I mean, your main concern comes from grid stability, right?
Yes.
How grids operate. Can you tell the viewer something about that?
I my first concern was closing nuclear plants, and I really got. I mean, I've worked in the electric utility industry for many years as a research chemist, trying to solve problems of corrosion and optimize pollution control. So I was at the Electric Power Research Institute, but when I sort of when I moved out here, that is that I moved away from California in order to be I'm in Vermont to be closer to my kids on the East Coast. I began interested in the fact that our local nuclear plant was being attacked by all kinds of people marching around and shouting at meetings and stuff. And I began working on defending it, and I began the newspapers around here tended to be very much anti-nuclear. So I started a blog, which meant that I was writing about many of the things the newspapers were writing about, but get a different perspective with different quotes and so forth. And one of the things that happened there is that I instead of just talking about the nuclear plant, I had to write about the nuclear plant's interactions with the grid. You know, grid operator says X, or whatever. And so I was very I thought, oh, okay, I've got to look into this. So I would do research, I would interview people, I'd write a blog post. And it turned out that there were people who I had no idea were following my blog who were following my blog. And one of them contacted me and said, "Hey, I've been following your blog, and you write a lot about Vermont Yankee interacting with the grid. Vermont Yankee's the name of the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever thought of joining uh, the coordinating committee for our grid operators outreach program to regular citizens, which is called the Consumer Liaison Group?"
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't even heard of it." So at any rate, it turned out that I did eventually get elected to the coordinating committee of that group. And that's when I really began learning about the grid, because while things were happening, the people in the group would be talking about the different the different interest groups and what they were trying to accomplish and so forth. And all of a sudden, I realized that the grid operator isn't just um, an entity that just says do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's what the grid operator says is a product of all these interest groups, and one of the things that really distressed me is I realized that to some extent nobody's minding the store. That is, all these interest groups, none of them have a clear mandate for reliability.
Right.
I mean, they just don't. It's not my department. You know, as I wrote in Shorting the Grid, if there's a problem, you won't have to pass the blame. Nobody will have the blame anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And I found it very distressing. And unlike nuclear, which I could write a blog post about. Okay, I wrote a blog post about it or talk to somebody about it. I found talking about the grid had so much backstory and so, because there are all these different entities and all these different groups, and there's the participants committee and the consumer liaison group, and then there's the grid operator and FERC, and I mean, it's just unbelievably complicated that I ended up talking about it. I was afraid nobody would listen for 30 minutes while I tried to explain something. That's why I wrote the book, so that I could have somewhere where people could read about it, and where maybe, hopefully, when I gave a talk, I could say, as I said in the book, blah, 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 and people could look it up later
Right.
instead of me continuing to talk for another 40 minutes. So I want to say I am very concerned with the reliability of the grid. I remember that one of the things that was kind of funny is my book was published in October 2020. And at the time, there were people, and including people at the grid operator's office, who someone accused me of being alarmist. And I was like, okay, whatever. And then when Texas happened, a lot of
Oh my
people said,
God. Yeah.
that happened in February, 6 months later. And so a
Can
lot
you
of people,
explain what happened in Texas? Because some of the people who watch this probably don't know anything about it.
okay, I just want to say one thing before I explain, and that
Yeah.
is that one of my friends wrote me a note and saying, Meredith, great publicity for your book. How did you arrange for Texas? No, but I didn't arrange for
I
Texas.
sent a nice letter to God and he made it happen.
It's like, yeah, right. I mean, I would never make anything like that happen if I could. But anyway, what happened in Texas? Well, Texas has uh, a grid operator of the same type that we have, but it also tends to run with a very low reserve margin
Mm,
traditionally. So it has got only um, only, a regular grid is supposed to run with 10-15% reserve margin,
mm.
so that if a power plant goes down, it still has enough to deal with it. And no power plant.
Basically meaning having power plants, running their generate or having running their turbines without actually producing electricity at that moment.
They might have to do that to be fast response, or they might
Hmm.
not. I mean,
Yeah.
not all the reserve margin is fast response,
Hmm.
but the reserve margin at least has to be there. But what happened is that in Texas, it ran with like 6-8% reserve margin. Okay, so
Hmm.
that was the first problem. The second problem was that one of the things that happened in our area and happens other places is you don't, if you're a power plant owner, you don't know how much you're going to make from that power plant, because it depends on the auctions. It depends on other things, mostly about the auctions. But
Hmm.
I could talk about the auctions in a minute. But what I'm saying is you don't have any guarantee that you'll make money. So the question is, should you spend money to winterize your plant?
Yeah.
And in many cases, the answer is nope.
And
Because
what is winterizing? Is that something like covering your turbine equipment with a roof and such, or?
yeah, it could be that. It could be setting up, systems that keep turbine water warmer. I mean, I don't know. One of them is protecting from the elements. That's
Mm.
very, very important.
Yep.
Uh, and another thing is in Vermont and in the Northeast here, you could claim that winterizing is having some oil stored on site, because we're over 50% of our energy, our electricity comes from natural gas.
Yep.
And natural gas is delivered just in time. That is, it's delivered as needed. Now, this isn't a perfect situation because things can interfere with the gas delivery. And indeed, they did in Texas. I mean, pumps froze, pumps went offline. I mean, not pumps, they're called compressors. But what I mean is the things that move the gas along the pipe.
Yeah.
Um, and, uh, and, they weren't well situated. Uh, another thing,
Because it was basically a freak weather event would happen in Texas, right?
yeah, let's talk about how freaky it was for a minute here.
Yeah.
The similar event happened 10 years before. There was a similar event with outages and stuff in, I think, 2011,
Mhm.
as well as 2021. I mean, I don't think something that happens every 10 years is
No,
all that freaky.
that's not that freaky. So what happened in Texas at that moment was they really got a nasty cold snap, basically.
They got a nasty cold snap. The wind went away, and they depend on wind. And then they also had inability to get gas delivered to the power plants. And basically, by the time, oh, I forgot to say, the uh, the demand went up tremendously because in Texas, in many parts of Texas, people don't have a real heating system in their house
Yeah.
because it doesn't ever get horribly cold, and so they might be depending on some space heaters. I mean, if it doesn't get terribly cold, just use some space heaters. But the trouble is that makes a peak.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's happening in many areas of the country is that plants or areas are going to winter peaking because they are using heat pumps and space heaters,
Yeah.
electricity. Now everybody's like, "Oh, let's electrify everything," which absolutely terrifies me
Yeah.
because we can hardly keep it going with lots of houses having
Yeah.
fossil fuel
Yeah,
heating.
natural gas or propane gas or something like
Yes,
that to heat their
exactly.
homes, right? I mean, it's mind-boggling, isn't it? Because I remember watching a documentary about how the UK has problems keeping the lights
Right.
on when EastEnders came on TV. Because the whole of the UK would run to the kitchen and start putting, the electric kettle on just to make tea.
Yes, yes,
And we have this problem in the European mainland as well, with huge events like soccer matches and such, that everybody is watching the soccer matches and they're all running their freezers to keep their beer cool and such. I mean, people don't realize what kind of influence they can have on an electricity system just by doing ordinary stuff.
I told someone who was interviewing me about this, and he said, "Even today, this is what happens." And I
Oh
said,
yeah.
"Well, yeah." And I found this uh, little video about Britain during a soccer game. It's on YouTube somewhere, and basically it shows that. The guy is watching very carefully for when the break is going to be because then he's going to
Oh
have to
yes.
turn on the hydro plants
In
uh,
Wales or in
up in
Scotland.
the hills, and he's going to tell the French operator send power. And I mean, in other words, the whole area from
Yeah.
Scotland to France, everybody is like, "Oh my gosh, here we go! This is
Th-
it,
th-
showtime!" Yeah,
they're making tea in England.
they're making tea in England.
Yes. So let's get back to Texas, because basically what happened there was a total system failure. The juice ran out. That's basically it, right?
Well, it did. I mean, it did. They just didn't have enough. One of the things that was going on is that the grid is always very carefully balanced
Hmm.
between demand and supply. It has to be incredibly carefully balanced. It's actually a miracle. I call the whole thing the angelic miracle of the grid, because the thing is, when it gets out of balance, the frequency of the, 60 cycle or 50 cycle,
Yeah,
that
the
frequency drops.
alternating current.
The alternating current drops frequency, and when the frequency drops, it can actually affect the machinery that is providing the power, and so that machinery usually has some kind of automatic shut off. Frequency so long, I'm out of here.
Yeah,
So far down, I can't operate this way. I'm out of here before I destroy myself.
a tripping
And
mechanism.
it's what?
A tripping mechanism. It trips.
It's a tripping mechanism. Thank you for making it clearer. I appreciate that. So anyway, the frequency drops and power plants trip off, which means there's more demand and less power to meet it, which means the frequency drops further, which means more power plants shut off, which means that. So in other words, what happens in this case is that the grid operator interrupts the situation by simply shutting off a whole lot of demand. All of a sudden, some area just doesn't have any power.
And that's
Sorry
your
about that.
blackout.
You got to be blacked out, because otherwise the whole grid will go down,
Yeah.
because the frequency will drop and we'll get into a vicious cycle of power plants going off because the frequency drops, and then the frequency drops further because the power plants aren't there, and blah blah. So what we do is we cut the demand. And the idea behind cutting the demand is obviously to run the frequency further up, but the theory is that you're going to have what is called rolling blackouts, which happened while I was in California. I was. I was there for a rolling blackout. I was having my hair cut.
Oh no.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I could have been in an elevator. I mean, it was fine.
Yeah.
But what happens with the rolling blackout is the grid operator says, okay, guys, I'm cutting your electricity in this area. Like, let's say I'm cutting Palo Alto and Menlo Park
Yeah.
for an hour. And
It's
now,
announced. It's announced, right?
no,
no.
it isn't.
Oh, right.
It is not announced. The fact that what rolling blackouts are happening is a fact, and you know it might happen to you, but it's not announced at the time. The reason it wasn't announced was they felt that bad guys would come to an area that didn't have electricity, and they'd be very hard to stop. That in other words, that there'd be looting, there'd be whatever. So
Oh my God.
they don't announce it. At least they didn't then. I mean, I haven't kept up with how they do it nowadays, but in those days they did not announce it. And
I can imagine that they still won't. I mean, if security systems don't work and such, I mean, I can imagine that they don't want to freak people out and
yeah,
offer opportunities to bad guys.
so anyway, the idea is, sorry about that, Menlo
all right.
Park and Palo Alto, but you're out for an hour, and now we're turning you back on, and Mountain View and Sunnyvale are going to be out for an hour or whatever. In other words, the blackout rolls from one area to another. It's black here, now it's back on. It's black here, now it's back on, and nobody's out for more than an hour.
It's
Well,
it's funny. It's funny that you mentioned Menlo Park. I mean, that's right next to Silicon Valley.
no, I know. And Palo Alto basically is Silicon Valley.
Yeah. I mean, those people, they have their own mini power plants on site that just take over when that happens. they're the lucky
yeah.
ones.
Well, no. Menlo Park and Palo Alto for the citizens don't have backup, but of course, the big industries, the big chip makers and software industries absolutely have backup.
Yeah,
There's no way they don't.
it's the contingency that they can afford, and others can't. It's that tragic.
It's not just that they can afford it. It's also that if there's an hour blackout at my house, it's inconvenient, and luckily we don't have any medical equipment that has to keep running.
Yeah,
But it's just sort of like, oh well, it's happening. But a big company can lose a lot of money by being blacked out for an hour. It can, all kinds of processes can be interrupted. I mean, the best that would be is that everybody gets paid for that hour and can't do any work.
Yeah.
But the worst could be that they lose a lot of product and they have a lot of startup time again, and
Yes.
it can be
And
very.
there are some companies that can't even recuperate from that. We had an aluminium plant in the Netherlands, and they said, "Well, maybe we can brave this storm, and we can become more flexible with our demand." And I was like, "Oh my gosh!" I mean, they are working with a molten aluminium slag,
I know.
and it has to be fed a load of electricity to stay molten, and if that electricity gone and it freezes up, then you're done.
Yeah, you're done. The whole pod is done. The system is done. The equipment is done. It's
Yeah,
just goodbye.
people have no idea.
No, they have no idea. They're all probably. I'm sorry to say that many people think that if the power goes out, that we'll sit around and we'll have some. We'll tell stories and we'll live like in the old days, and it'll be just fun for the kids. And
Forget about
they have no idea what it's really could be like. So anyway, getting back to Texas, we've
Yeah.
had quite a little. So anyway, Texas was supposed to have rolling blackouts. That is, it was supposed to be blacked out here for an hour and then turned on there for an hour, and but it didn't work. It got blacked out and they couldn't get it back on. So some areas were without power for about 48 hours.
Boy,
That isn't how it's supposed to work.
no.
Because within 48 hours, of course, even a household is going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And at any rate, uh, so that was one of the things that happened in Texas, at which point uh, many people died. I mean, the you can do the death rate for that blackout different ways. You can look at the number of people that actually died of hypothermia in their houses or died of carbon monoxide poisoning in their houses because they tried to bring some kind of fire within the house,
Oh my
or
God.
they put their generator too close to a window, or all kinds of amusing things can happen.
Yeah.
But I mean, but so you can count those people, they can say they died directly because of this. But then there's the extra, there's usually a bunch of what's called, extra deaths, a death rate that goes up, and you don't know what caused it, but oddly enough, it's just around the time of the blackout.
Yeah.
So some people will pass away from some indirect problems due to the blackout. Maybe they can't get to the doctor because they can't get their garage door open
Oh my
or
gosh.
whatever, you know.
We had so last week, we the past 2 weeks we had some pretty bad dark doldrums in Europe, and electricity spiked. Electricity prices spiked all the way up to 900 euros per megawatt hour,
I
which
saw
is,
that.
in some places it was 10, 15 times more than they would usually pay. Now, for us ratepayers, that's not that interesting unless you have a variable contract. Then you really need to pull the plug and basically say, okay, I'm not using electricity anymore at this moment, otherwise I will go bankrupt. But what was interesting was that the Germans had this television program, and this television program said, okay, this is what is going to happen if there's a blackout. So within 2 hours, what happens is the telecom systems break down, the traffic systems break down. So you're going to get a lot more traffic accidents. People can't reach, care providers, what do you call them? Emergency services. People can't
Mhm.
reach emergency services. Then after a couple of hours, you have these home systems that keep people, alive, oxygen and respiratory systems that run on electricity and have a small battery in case of emergency. After a couple of hours, if there's no electricity coming in there, some of those systems might start to fail. And it went up to like 48 hours, and it basically said after 48 hours, there's a guarantee of having a couple of hundred, maybe even a couple of thousand deaths, simply because electricity stopped working. So it's really interesting business, and people are really playing Russian roulette with a lot of lives. They don't realize.
No, they don't. They don't. Let me give you an example. One of the things that I talked about, the buck doesn't stop anywhere about the grid,
Mm,
is that basically on the RTO grids, the RTO is Regional Transmission Organization grids, which are organized with auctions. And if you own a power plant, the power plant bids into the auction and is chosen or not chosen at 5 minute intervals. And but actually, the operators are smart and they don't just turn power plants on and off every 5 minutes, but they the auctions run every 5 minutes, and so the amount of money that the power plant gets is the clearing price, not the price they bid. So if there's three power plants, and one bids $10 per megawatt hour, and the next one bids 20, and the third one bids $30 per megawatt hour, and the operator needs all three of the plants, then all the plants get $30 per megawatt hour. The one that bid 10, the one that bid 20, and the one that bid 30.
mhm.
And so that's how the clearing price for the auctions
It's a
work.
bit like merit order.
Yeah, well, that's merit order.
Yeah,
Yeah, but the difference is you could do merit order and still pay as bid.
yeah.
You see, you could say, "Oh, great, we've got this $10 plant here. We're gonna pay them $10." But as it turns out, what you do is merit order. You go with the lowest price plant, but you pay everybody the bid of the highest price plant.
Yeah.
That's how the auctions work.
So there's also some possibility to game the system. I mean, that's what happened in Germany. At least that's what they are now investigating, because the power spike was much higher than they actually anticipated. So somebody was gaming the system.
Oh, it is not hard to game it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry to say, it's not hard to game
It's
it because
probably it's probably the nature of the deal.
it's you have a market monitor, and the market monitor is supposed to keep track of making sure it isn't gamed. But the market monitor can usually not, can, well, I don't want to blame any market monitors. I'm just saying that it's harder to monitor things when they're happening in real time. And
Yeah.
so for example, let's say I own two power plants, and I've been in at something and I notice that the price is beginning to spike. Well, I say, oh my gosh, it's so cold out there. One of my plants isn't working, and I
Yeah,
take
yeah,
it
yeah, yeah, yeah.
offline,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and
That's
all of
what
a sudden
happened.
the price spikes higher. Oh my
Oh,
goodness!
it works
Now
again.
who would guess this?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the plant that I still have running is now making, one and a half to two times what it made before I took my other plant offline,
Yeah.
and the plant that's offline isn't using any fuel. So all of a sudden, I'm in good shape. I'm in very good
Exactly.
shape. So the thing is, it's hard to monitor this because, as a matter of fact, in cold weather, plants sometimes can't get online.
Yeah.
So if I say one of my plants can't get online, you're going to have to do some kind of investigation before you decide that it's my decision that it can't get online.
Yeah.
It's not something to do with the plant.
I mean, this is we're now talking about what we are now talking about clearly shows you the necessity of having these plans, having these plans that you can switch on and off
Oh, yeah.
at a near moment's notice. I'm not against renewables as much as people would think, because obviously I am very critical about renewables. But can we talk about just a bit about how hard renewables make it for not just grid operators but also for owners of these power plants to keep everything in the air? I mean, it's
Well, let's look at it this way. Somebody says, the renewables are the cheapest thing on the grid. That's not what they mean. Is many renewables can bid into the grid at zero and then take whatever the clearing price is.
Mm.
Okay, now why can they bid in at zero? Well, they usually don't have to pay for fuel, and in terms of their operating costs, they get what is called out of market compensation, which means that they have other sources of money besides selling a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
Okay, so they one of the sources of money is they get, for example, in the United States, production tax credits. Okay, and there's a wonderful quote from Warren Buffett from a couple of years ago who explains that he likes wind turbines because he'll do anything to lower Berkshire Hathaway's tax bill, and the only reason wind turbines are financially viable is the tax credits because they go against the tax bill.
Yeah.
And then they also get to sell something called RECs, renewable energy credits. And so, for example, let's say they're trying to put a stop to this, but uh, it's it's baked in at this point. So what
There's so
happens?
much money in it.
I know it's really great. So what happens is that I have a wind turbine, and it's over here in Wyoming, and it's making power. And meanwhile, over in Pennsylvania, say, well, that's not a good example because they're on different grids. So let's say it's
In North Dakota.
it's in North Dakota, the wind turbine, and over in Pennsylvania, they're burning some coal, and they have a requirement by their grid operator that they use 20% uh, renewables. So they say, okay, I know a guy in North Dakota who can sell me renewable energy certificates
Yeah.
for 20% of my power needs. And so the guy who runs the wind turbine gets the money for the renewable energy certificates. The guy in Pennsylvania says, see, I'm green. Look at this. I got this piece of paper that says I'm green.
It's the
And
ultimate form of greenwashing.
yeah, the ultimate form of greenwashing. And so, a lot of us were really annoyed when the tech giants were all saying, well, I'm 100% green electricity.
Oh yes, I remember that
And
Apple was one of those who.
oh, 100% green.
Yeah.
No, they were getting electricity right off the grid. And what was on the grid included fossil and renewable and nuclear and hydro, all kinds of stuff. And that's what their electricity mix was. But what they did was they were profitable enough to buy RECs for 100% of the electricity they used.
Uh,
So all of a sudden they're green. And so you have this vision of, a great big server farm surrounded by wind turbines. And
yeah.
that's not what's happening.
Oh, we have the same. We have two prime examples of that in the Netherlands. We have one Microsoft data center in a very windy area that's built right between a big wind farm, but and they bought all the electricity that came from the wind farm, uh, making it green. But the wind farm that surrounds it never produces enough electricity, so obviously it's just going to be gas and coal that actually powers that data center. But the other one is the national railways. The national railways has had this claim for years that it runs on 100% wind. And then I started looking into this, and where do they buy their wind from? Sweden and Denmark, and I believe there was one other country, Poland or Germany. I can't recall. I mean, before the electricity that was produced at those wind farms, I mean, it never reaches the Netherlands ever.
Yeah, right, right. Exactly. And that happens all the time. And One of the things is that, as I noted in my book, there are two kinds of RECs. There's a REC, which is a compliance REC, and another, which is a voluntary REC, which has a different name, and I forgot the name. But at any rate, what happens is that if you're a utility in a jurisdiction where the grid operator says you have to be 20% or 30% renewable, you are buying compliance RECs because you have to comply with that. And those tend to be more expensive because you need them and you will buy them. And so they're what I could say cost insensitive or whatever, price insensitive. But meanwhile, you could sometimes I'd go up to the some ski area around here. I mean, I don't ski, but I would go up to a ski area, for to meet some friends or
The
because it was.
Berkshires.
Yeah, well, no, actually, it's the Green Mountains around here. But
Okay,
I
okay.
go, yeah, the Berkshires are great too. But at any rate, the uh, the ski area would, of course, have a lot of upscale restaurants. So one of the nice things about going to a ski area is you're out somewhere pretty and you go to an upscale restaurant and so forth. And so at this upscale restaurant, uh, I was looking, and every table said 100% of the electricity in this restaurant is green.
No.
And I thought, whoa, I don't think so. But of course, what it meant was we have bought voluntary renewable energy credits. In other words, we're not required to buy them, and people only sell them on the voluntary market if they have too many, and so they're cheap. And so, yes, we're green, and it didn't cost us much.
A really high class restaurant
Yeah,
that can pay for that. I mean, that's
yeah,
awesome.
that's right. That's right.
That's amazing. I mean, it, it is flabbergasting. I really I'm lost for words half of the time when I'm talking about these subjects. How the world has been structured. We've just seen it in Europe as well. So we have, for instance, these investment. The European Union has this taxonomy, right? And if you're worthy of having the green label, then everybody can can do sustainable financing in this stuff, right? And obviously all that green stuff is wind and solar. And now the ministers, the European ministers, are gathering somewhere in Brussels or in Strasbourg, the other place, and they're talking about what is next for Europe. And then they come up with this luminous idea. Let's make another target for renewables. Let's make it even more ambitious. And so what happens is right now European countries are waking up to the fact that this whole renewable scheme it isn't really bringing the results that we need. Keeping our economy competitive is one of those things. I mean, our economy is slowly but surely starting to languish, and we're losing a lot of jobs. We're even closing factories left and right. So these countries say, no, it's nice that we want to do decarbonization, but it's only going to work if we add nuclear to that mix. And then I think Germany has so much energy and time invested in this whole renewable scheme. I mean, there's so much money flowing into these renewables, and everybody believes that this is the solution to all our problems, while they don't grasp that it's actually worsening everything. You know, it's, I just
No, that is true. But one of the things is uh, there's a romantic streak in all of us that wants everything to be just lovely. And of course, a renewable based economy would be just so wonderful. We would be just using the wind and the water and the sunlight, and it would be great. Of course, it actually wouldn't be great because we did that for a couple of millennia before we discovered how to make a heat engine with coal.
yeah.
But and people had very short lives. One of the things that people don't remember is that the Industrial Revolution actually caused lives to be lengthened because people had more food and more warmth and so forth. Everybody thinks about the dark satanic mills and the pollution, and it was all true, and it definitely decreased life expectancies, but not as much as hunger and cold did.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything you would like to add to this discussion? I mean, we're nearing 45 minutes. I really want to give you the last word.
Oh gosh, I should really think about what I'm going to say as the last word. No,
Hey, you can take your time if you want to.
no, I'm very happy to be on this podcast because I'm very interested in how this renewables nuclear goes in other parts of the world. They can be examples for us, good or bad. For us in the United States, that is.
Yeah.
There was a time when everybody I talked to said, well, what we want to do is be more like Germany. And
Oh
they were
boy.
like, we want to be, no, really, really. They said, I was in Germany and there were a lot of wind turbines and we want to be that way. And I'm like, speak for yourself. I don't know about this we business, but I just I just want to say that it's important to look at what other countries have done and how it's worked for them. And I think the Europeans are beginning to do that.
Yeah.
They're beginning to look at Germany and say, that's not the model we want. I don't think we actually want to be 100% renewable with no nuclear. I
Look at
think we want to build some nuclear plants.
look at the problems you're having.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess the thing is learn from others. It's so much cheaper than learning by making all the mistakes
Oh,
yourself.
that's the best way to end this video, Meredith. Absolutely amazing sentiment, and something that I live by. I think that that is the most important message that I want to, you know, give to my viewers. Learn from other people's mistakes. It's you can make them there yourself, but don't make them, you know, uh, ending economies, ending big factories and such. I mean, little
Oh,
mistakes are good.
I also want to say everybody go buy my book, Shorting the Grid.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I got a proofreading copy, so but in any, I think that is a very very good good book that everybody should read because it gives you some insight in the workings of these grids, not just technical, but also how everything is structured around it with these groups that you were talking about. Everybody who has their own their own beef in the game, but is not interested in whether it runs stable or not.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
that those are really good takeaways from the book. So yeah, Shorting the Grid, that's absolutely a book that I would recommend everybody buy and read if they want to learn something about grid operation. And with that, I would like to thank Meredith for coming on the show. I would like to thank you for watching, and may the strong force be with you. Bye bye.
Wow.